Good morning. I'm one of those unusual people who actually used to love working for a living. I didn't care what I did, and I've gone from both extremes of working in a supermarket on the tills to being a personal assistant to managing directors. I got my fulfillment from meeting different people and getting a salary each month, which gave me the independent means to do what I really wanted to do. And because I was employed by a secretarial agency, I had the opportunity to work in lots of different firms where often I was offered full-time employment. But because I loved variety, I invariably refused. That is, until I found someplace really exciting. That's how I got my job at the advertising agency. This was the best job I'd landed up until then. And during the time I was there, my pastor started preaching radical discipleship from the Sermon on the Mount, which absolutely transformed me. God blessed me so much that a mini revival broke out in the firm, and I started holding Bible studies and prayer meetings with some of the employees during the lunch breaks. But just as I was at the peak of this exciting period in my life, God called me. He told me to leave my job and work full-time for him. I remember telling my pastor what God had told me, and he was all excited as I was already working for him as the church secretary at the weekends. Go for it! You're single! You've got nothing to lose. But when I told him the problems this would cause for me, like having no income, meaning I couldn't pay my rent for my flat and I wouldn't be able to afford my car, he just fobbed it off by saying, "What are you worrying about? If God's called you, then he'll provide. But you'll never prove your calling unless you put it to the test and step out in faith." Well, I was 26 years old and decided to go for it. I gave my notice in at work and saw God work in my circumstances. I now met with the pastor more regularly, and what a difference that made to me spiritually. I was breathing, living, eating and sleeping God from morning till night, and my relationship with God was getting stronger and stronger. I worked with the pastor during the day, provided the music and led the singing for every church meeting, and then practiced and performed and also recorded albums with the church band I was in. We held coffee mornings in the church twice a week where we relayed over and over again the Sunday sermon so that people who wandered in could hear the message over a cuppa, and we'd chat with them about God. We decided to blitz the whole of Manchester with leaflets advertising the church and telling people that God could meet their needs. So twice a week I'd organise and take out a van load of church members to put these leaflets through house letterboxes. Then we'd stop off for soup and prayer at another member's house at lunchtime before continuing our leaflet distribution in the afternoon. Wow, life was so different. My pastor had said, "Go for it, you're single, you've got nothing to lose." But he was completely wrong. There was so much for me to lose, and they were all things I hadn't even considered when I handed in my notice. For one thing, when I gave up secular employment, I gave up my status. When working as a personal assistant to the senior surveyor in the property development company, I was in quite a high position of authority and was regularly wined and dined by clients. In secular employment, I also had a value. When given the position, I was told that because I was representing the company, my salary would be high as I was expected to dress well. And my value increased tremendously as a jingle singer because I could earn in just a couple of days what I'd normally earn in a whole month. But now, I couldn't afford to go out on shopping sprees to buy clothes. In fact, because I wasn't in an office anymore, nor in the recording studios, singing jingles and rubbing shoulders with famous personalities, there was nobody to impress anymore, so I had no need of the clothes I already had. When I gave up my flat, I gave up my independence. The couple helping me were financially challenged themselves, so I didn't feel at liberty to have the heating on as long as I would have done normally in my own flat, knowing how expensive it was. Also, because I relied on them now for my food each day, I couldn't be fussy. but I had to alter my eating habits to fit in with them. And I felt deprived. Yeah, I had to give up my flat. Yes, I had to give up my car. Yes, it hurt to have my independence stripped away when God provided others to house me and bear my burdens. Believe me, you've no idea how much pride and ego you have until God begins to strip you. Yet there was a joy in all of this sacrifice. I'd gained far more than I'd lost. I was doing something which I felt was eternally valuable for others as well as myself. My whole life was so purposeful. But 5 years down the line, God spoke to me and told me to stop doing everything I was doing in the church. Would God say a thing like that? Well, that's exactly what I thought. And when I shared it with my pastor, that's exactly what he thought. But God made it very clear, so I came off the platform where I'd been stationed for 15 years, and I just sat in the pews like everyone else. My pastor was convinced that this was only temporary, so I never made any announcement as to why I'd stepped down, making people draw their own conclusions. And that was very revealing. Unbeknownst to me, there had been a lot of envy concerning my preferential treatment, and rumours started flying around that I was being disciplined for some disgraceful conduct. I found it so hurtful that within 3 months, I was out of the church altogether. And one of the rumours that followed me was that I'd left the church to have an abortion. So now, I'd lost my reputation also. I left the church, I left the pastor, and after I'd found a job, I left the couple supporting me and moved once more into an apartment. I felt so crushed that I didn't want anything to do with church again. The time I was trying my hardest to be a committed Christian was the time I was criticised the most. It didn't take me long to realise that I'd only fallen out with carnal Christians. I hadn't fallen out with God. I'd always thought of God and the church building as being inseparable, but God was now showing me that that wasn't true at all. Sometime after I'd left my home church, I attended a prayer meeting in another church. The congregation sang a song together with fervour. You might know it. Speak, O Lord, speak to me. Speak and I'll be quick to answer thee. And as they were singing, God showed me a vision. In the vision, whilst I was seated in the congregation, I heard an earth-shattering, thundering voice call to the people, telling them to come outside. You know, it was so real that I opened my eyes to see if anyone else had heard the voice. But they all had their eyes shut and their heads bowed, and nobody made a move. I closed my eyes, and again I heard the voice. I knew now that God was talking, and the voice was so strong and powerful that I was afraid to obey it. So in my vision, I got out of my seat and I left the building. Once outside the church doors, I looked around and was surprised to note that nobody else had left their seats. The other people in the congregation, this was still in my vision, they remained seated in their comfortable seats and carried on singing and praying. I wondered what was going on and asked the Lord if this was really necessary. The thundering voice told me to walk without any explanation, and again I felt afraid to disobey, so I walked. I walked for a while and came to the edge of the town. The pavement had ceased and I had to walk across fields. But still I had that compelling feeling that I had to continue walking. I came to the foot of a mountain and expected God to tell me why he'd called me from the church. I asked the Lord again if this was really necessary, but there was no voice. God didn't answer this time. I just had that compulsion to continue and the fear to disobey. So I began my journey up the mountain. It was beginning to get dusky. I looked at my watch and noticed that it was time for the people to be coming out of the church now, so I looked back to where I'd come from. As I was partway up the mountain, I could see down and see the people leaving the church, chatting to each other and making their way to their individual homes. I thought about my own home and would have loved to be doing the same. I was completely alone. and would have loved the company of some of the other saints from the church. Again, I asked if this was really necessary, but the Lord called me on. It was getting quite cold now, and as I began to climb higher, I looked down and saw the church members sitting in their nice warm houses by their fires, drinking hot beverages and eating supper. My stomach began to growl as it felt deprived of the comforts it was used to. But still, I was pushed on to continue my journey. I climbed higher and higher until the grass no longer grew and I had to walk on rough rocks. I hadn't been prepared for this climb, so the flimsy shoes I was wearing began to fall apart, and it wasn't long before they'd broken off completely, and I was forced to walk without them. Darkness fell. I had no torch, and I couldn't see clearly. I was cold, hungry, lonely, and very tired. I looked down below, and I could see the lights on in the houses. I watched as people began to take off their dressing gowns and slippers and slip between the fresh, clean sheets of their comfortable beds in their nice, warm houses, and longed to be doing the same. I asked the Lord again if this was really necessary. But I'd already heard God's voice and was afraid to disobey, so I wearily carried on my way. It seemed like the journey took forever. But at last I reached the top of the mountain. In the darkness, I saw the outline of an altar, a stone slab erected on some smaller stones. My heart began to pound. Instinctively, I knew what was expected of me, and I shrank away in terror. As I was crouching on the ground, afraid to move, I heard the song I'd sung in the church that evening ring out in my ears. "Speak, O Lord, speak to me. Speak, and I'll be quick to answer thee." I was faced with the starkness of my own words. Is that all it was, words? Or did I really mean what I sang? At last, I edged my way towards the altar, and with tears in my eyes, I lay down upon it. Nothing happened. I looked around the base of the altar, and I saw a knife. And then the awful realization that God expected me to kill myself with it. "Oh God," I cried, from the depth of my soul, "is this really necessary?" The voice didn't thunder out a command like I'd heard in the church, but though it was soft and gentle, it still carried the same weight, and I feared to disobey. My spirit was willing, but my flesh kicked and screamed. With all my heart, I wanted to serve God, but my physical body rejected the very thought of pain. I cried out to God for help and then plunged the knife into myself. And it was then that I seemed to look from outside my body at what was happening. As the knife killed my flesh, so it released my spirit. My body lay prostrate on the altar, but my spirit rose as light as a feather. I watched as I saw my spirit began to skip and dance upon the mountaintop. It wasn't affected by the cold, nor did it feel hunger. These feelings could only be experienced in the flesh. But once the flesh had been put to death, my spirit was free to serve God with complete abandonment. I tripped down the mountain back to my home, but I'd been transformed. I lived my life among others, but I was totally different from them, with a brand new focus. And I realised why the journey had been necessary. I had to crucify the flesh in order to live to God. Sacrifice is so worth it. Paul the Apostle made great sacrifices and endured great persecutions for preaching the gospel, and he did it willingly. In Philippians 2, verse 16, this is what Paul said. "I've held forth the word of life, that I may rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain, neither laboured in vain. Yes, and if I be offered upon the sacrifice of service of your faith, I joy and rejoice with you all." 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 6. Paul said again, "For I am now ready to be offered." That means martyred. "And the time of my departure is at hand. I've fought a good fight. I've finished my course. I've kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day, and not to me only, but unto all them also that love his appearing. To make a sacrifice means you're going to have to give up something very valuable to you personally. If the reason you're sacrificing is because you're trying to escape from something or from somewhere, then it's not a sacrifice at all, because you're glad to be free of it. It isn't costing you anything. But if it's costing you dearly, and yet you're giving it up willingly from your heart, that's a precious offering to God, giving off a sweet-smelling savour, and he is well pleased. God bless you.